Engaging our partners in a way that we really are having them provide feedback and being partners in the institutional engagement, and how do we know? Assessing impact of institutional engagement on faculty, community, and institution. Again, how do we know what's happening? And unless we're assessing it, we don't know. Both of these assessment components come out of a sense of knowing what we expect as outcomes. And so it pushes us also to think about outcomes, not only learning outcomes for our students, but outcomes in terms of partnerships, outcomes for faculty development. And then if we know what those outcomes are, we could then assess them. And then the third part here is initiating and maintaining mutuality and reciprocity in partnerships. These were areas generally across the applications that there were real problems and challenges. And so these are areas that we might think about, how would we begin to address these? All right, so that takes me to proposition 2. And that is that engagement equals reciprocity. So what do I mean by that? If you go back to the definition, you remember that it ends with this notion of reciprocity. Right? The mutual and beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. This notion of reciprocity is really critical in understanding what we mean when we talk about engagement. This quote here comes from Ernest Boyer's last piece, which you recall is called the Scholarship of Engagement. So in 1990, Boyer writes Scholarship Reconsidered. And in that piece, he lays out 4 areas of scholarship: the scholarship of discovery, the scholarship of integration, which we might think of interdisciplinarity, scholarship of teaching, which we now call the scholarship of teaching and learning, and then he called this, the other part, the scholarship of application. And in many ways, this was revolutionary, right? It was really trying to shake up higher education, to rethink what we meant when we talked about scholarly work. And it was. But there was something else going on, which was that all of those approaches still had a very traditional about the way that knowledge was generated. All of them, including the scholarship of application, was framed in the way that knowledge was generated in the university and applied externally. That we had expert knowledge in the university, and we could then take that and apply it outside the university. A very unidirectional way of thinking about knowledge generation. By the time Boyer writes the Scholarship of Engagement, he's thinking about knowledge generation very differently. And what he's thinking about is that knowledge gets generated by a two-way interchange between those who are in the academy and those who are outside the academy. That there are places where knowledge is generated outside the academy. What a revolutionary idea. And only when we bring those centers of knowledge together with the university can we generate new knowledge. That's the scholarship of engagement. It's not the scholarship of application. So Boyer's making a major shift here. I think for many of us, we didn't really pick up that shift, but that's what's going on. He and actually a bunch of his colleagues are doing this. So when he's talking about the scholarship of engagement, he's talking about a different kind of relationship. And that it's a two-way interchange. And there is what we now talk about, reciprocity. It's not partnerships, it's not mutuality alone, but it's reciprocity. A two-way interchange, where knowledge that's generated outside the academy is valued and legitimized as authentic knowledge. And it's brought together with academic knowledge to generate new knowledge. So others picking up on this, Jean Rice actually was a colleague of Boyer's. So the key here is that engagement requires going beyond this expert model that I just described to a form of collaboration, this two-way interchange. Calls on faculty to move beyond outreach, ask scholars to move beyond service with its overtones of noblesse oblige. What it emphasizes is genuine collaboration, real reciprocity. So I want to just briefly tell you about a study that we're actually still working on. We were through a couple phases of it, where myself and some colleagues looked at the 2006 Carnegie applications, and very specifically one part of them, which was that question about promotion and tenure guidelines. And we wanted to understand what was happening, both around the guidelines, but also around what we were seeing as the guidelines as artifacts of culture, what was happening with cultural change on campus. And I won't go into a lot of the details here, but I do want to focus on a few things. Again, these were the questions that I talked about earlier. So one of the things that we found, these are themes that emerged in our study. Campuses are broadening categories of research in ways that provide legitimacy for community-engaged scholarship. And so that's one of the things we found, that there is this broadening of the notion of scholarship which legitimizes community-engaged scholarship. What we did was we looked at all of the applications. There were 62 that had both the classification for curricular engagement and outreach and partnerships. In 2006, the question around promotion and tenure guidelines was an optional question. So 33 campuses answered that question. You can conjecture what the others were doing if they didn't answer it. Campuses that were revising or had revised their guidelines to include community-engaged scholarship, there were 16 of those 33. That's that movement from the third to the fourth. They were at least in the process of it. Campuses that had Boyerized their guidelines were 9 of them. What I mean by Boyerized, they had adopted Boyer's language in the 4 different areas of scholarship. And then campuses where their guidelines specifically articulated community-engaged work in teaching, in research and scholarship, and in service, there were 7. Not many. Actually, if we were to do this in 2008 now, look at 2008, you would actually be in this group because you're articulating it in all of your areas of the faculty goal. So another of our findings at the top here was that promotion and tenure materials revealed little evidence that reciprocity is valued, accepted, or even authentically understood. So when we looked at, the way we did this, we looked at the applications and then we looked at the faculty handbooks of those campuses. I can tell you there was a good deal of discrepancy there. But then looking at the faculty handbooks, we really tried to understand what was going on in terms of community-engaged scholarship and this question of reciprocity. We did find some evidence of this, and so I'm just giving you some examples of what we found where reciprocity was apparent. Here's one of them. This comes from an application. It says accomplishments and extension and engagement represent an ongoing two-way interchange of knowledge, information, understanding, and services. Right? This is beyond that expert model, but a two-way interchange. This is language around reciprocity. Here's some others. Again, there weren't a lot, but this is, I think, one of my favorites. So this is actually worth unpacking and spending at least a little bit of time with it. You can see where it begins. That engaged scholarship now subsumes the scholarship of application. So here's a campus which had Boyerized their guidelines and then essentially re-Boyerized them, right, based on Boyer's later work. They make the distinction here between the scholarship of application, which is one form of scholarship, and the scholarship of engagement, which is different. It's not the scholarship of application. And so then they talk about the collaborative process. This is actually really wonderful language. But I want to go here. Engaged scholarship conceptualizes community groups as those outside the academy, and it requires shared authority. Shared authority. When I think about that, I think about Paulo Freire's work where he talks about the authority of knowledge. Right? So here we have this notion of a shared authority of knowledge. Right? That has huge implications. Right? It means that those outside the academy actually have legitimate knowledge. And that in order to generate new knowledge, we have to share authority of knowledge creation. So follow this through. It requires shared authority at all stages of the research process, from defining the research problem, choosing theoretical and methodological approaches, conducting the research, developing the final product, to participating in peer evaluation. I just want to emphasize for you that that's huge. Right? That's a major shift in academic culture. And the two parts which are the most important shifts and the most, I think, difficult for many of us in the academy is this says to us, we need to redefine what is a publication, and we need to redefine who is a peer in peer review. Because if we're going to do this collaborative work with shared authority in generating knowledge,